Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about something a little different than normal. We're going to talk about IFR4NPO. And many of you are probably not familiar with this project, but it's actually a really important project for nonprofits. There's currently not a lot of guidance globally for not-for-profit entities. Here in the United States, we have an excellent section of the codification, topic 958, that handles nonprofit GAAP. But we can't say that across the globe. And while we have IFRS, there are many parts of IFRS that don't really address non-public entities. IFRS as itself is really intended for public companies, and then IFRS for SMEs handles those private entities, but again, not really focused specifically on nonprofit entities. And so today we're going to talk about part one of the proposal. There is a consultation paper. It'll be in two parts, and we're going to address it in two separate blogs. So today we're going to focus on part one. And again, this is giving nonprofit organizations and their stakeholders their opportunity to contribute to creating international financial reporting for nonprofit entities. Now, it won't be mandatory because it doesn't work like that. So it will be for each jurisdiction to determine whether they want to adopt the guidance in full or in part, but it is something that's being worked on across the globe. In fact, Jeff Mechanic from the FASB here in the United States is part of the global process to develop these standards. So while we do have an amazing codification here in the United States, when we look globally, it's lacking, and Jeff has volunteered to his time to participate in this, and I've learned a lot from some of the work that he's doing here. So the issue, again, no common international accounting standards for nonprofit organizations. And the goal here is to strengthen governance and financial management through standardization. So as opposed to each time, donors dictating what it's going to look like, we really want it to have a more standardized set of guidance. So they developed three objectives. Objective one, to improve the quality, transparency, and credibility of nonprofit financial reports, right? So our goal here is to obviously make them useful, right? So at the end of the day, quality and transparency being key. Objective two, to support the provision of not-for-profit financial information that is useful for decision-making and accountability, balancing the needs of preparers and users. And then objective three, to address specific nonprofit organization issues which promote comparability of financial reports. So in part one, they're looking at the general reporting issues. And so in the general reporting issues, they're looking at, well, what organizations are intended to use this model. And so it proposes a broad set of characteristics to describe the types of organization most likely to fall within this guidance. And then in part one, it looks at proposing the use of general purpose financial statements using an accrual basis. And so we'll kind of dive into that. In part two, which we will deal with separately, it's going to focus on specific financial reporting issues. So instead of looking sort of holistically at nonprofits, it's going to dive into some of the details of the various reporting elements. Now, they've actually separated the comment deadline for the proposal. So the comment deadline for part two isn't until September 24th. So we have a little bit more time for that one. So what did they decide on scope? Well, these are organizations that have the primary objective of delivering services for public benefit. And then they direct any surpluses to furthering their primary service delivery objective. They derive income from voluntary funding, and they hold and use assets for social purposes. So these are not a requirement that you have to meet all of them. These are really and or, right? So you can have any mixture of these and be a type of organization that they would want to address. It also looks at what are the needs of these stakeholders, right? So when we look at the stakeholders for NPO issues, we have our service users. All right, these are the sometimes referred to as beneficiaries of the services provided by nonprofits. The resource provider, whether that's creditors or donors. Regulators have a big part here, as well as societal accountability. And the goal here is to figure out, well, what do stakeholders need in terms of information? And so obviously they want to know, are you achieving your objectives, right? So most nonprofits are mission oriented. Are you achieving and making progress on your mission? Are you doing it in a way that's efficient and effective? right? So when we think about it from a user's perspective, we want to make sure that the dollars that are going in are being used in a way that makes the most sense, obviously while complying with any restrictions or regulations, and then looking towards having a healthy overall financial health. We want to make sure this is a long-term item. And so in the general section, they really focused on this concept of accrual accounting, right? So instead of using cash basis or a modified cash basis, they went on with the concept of really trying to look at an overall view of the accrual accounting. And so we would be recognizing items there. And then also, not surprisingly, inclusion of non-financial reporting information. So while we are thinking about this from a financial reporting perspective, obviously the broader needs of users regarding the program, their activities, etc. So what are they starting off with? What's their basis to begin with? They're starting off with IFRS for SMEs. Again, we already have IFRS, which is an international standard. And so IFRS for SMEs is the smaller medium entity, right? So they've already carved out things that are really for big public companies, and they've left a little bit. So that's the suggested start. However, they do understand that they are going to have to look for unique elements that impact nonprofits. So while this is a shorter, simplified standard, it does align with full IFRS. People would typically be familiar with IFRS globally. And, when you think about it from not having to start from scratch, that's the best starting point. But they do recognize that they're going to have to enhance this. So this is sort of the basis. And then they're going to develop this set of standards that would then apply for nonprofits. As I mentioned, there's a different comment deadline for part 1 versus part 2. Comments on part 1 are requested by the July 30th, 2021. So hopefully that'll give you an opportunity to think about this if you work with nonprofits, especially nonprofits that are globally related. A lot of times when we think about this, we tend to think about U.S. Nonprofits, but a lot of them have international arms or they have an international impact. Maybe they would have an interest in learning more about this more international version. So comments again due by July 30th, 2021. And that's a wrap for today's blog. Hopefully you found it interesting. I know I did in reviewing the consultation paper, and I look forward to coming back and talking about part 2 in the near future. Thank you guys for joining, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.